But first, let's talk about this because this has been dominating the news all week. And you know, this show often touches on subjects that are dominating the news agenda. But this week, the Prime Minister has said in a speech that some people in the community are quietly condoning Islamist extremism. He said a lot more than that as well, and we will try and put it into context. But really, the whole speech is focused around how to combat extremism. It comes after 3 Bradford sisters and their 9 children split into 2 groups to cross the border into Syria, according to an Islamic State smuggler. The story of this family, who are believed to be missing in Syria, has been making the headlines over the last week. Sisters Khadija, Sugra and Zora and their children really have gone missing after travelling to Saudi Arabia, and we've been hearing all week their husbands across the TV news making emotional appeals for them to return. Let's now have a little chat to Zubeda Limbada. She's from Birmingham. She's the director of Connect Justice, which is a group that looks at preventing extremism in all faiths. And really, she works with a lot of government agencies as well. Welcome to the programme, Zubeda.
Hello.
Hi. We've also got on the telephone line Raza Nadeem from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, which is a civil liberties group. Welcome to the programme, Raza.
Hi there.
Hi. Let's start with you then, Zubeda. Zubeda, what do you make of the Prime Minister's comments? I've just read out a little snippet there. In another part of his speech, he's basically saying that the growing threat posed by Islamic State could only be defeated if Muslim communities and internet service providers stopped giving any credence to an Islamic extremist ideology that claims the West is evil and democracy is wrong and women are inferior. What do you make of what he's had to say in this speech?
So as you quite rightly explained, it came in the context of what's been happening in Bradford with the family. And he made a speech in Slovakia, quietly condoning those who side with ISIS. And one of the kind of quietly troubling things in this is the fact that many people in the Muslim communities that we engage with see this as something surprising, in that we need to all work in terms of addressing radicalisation and extremism. So those partnership elements are very important. But to provide a speech in Slovakia almost feels like lecturing those from afar on a problem that is shared and on a problem that the government itself does not understand. And I think that's kind of the crux of what the problem is, because unless we engage, unless we talk to communities, unless we bring communities on side, then it's going to be a problem. But more importantly, the bigger matter here was the fact that he lumped most Muslim people, a very diverse community, culture, etc., into this aspect of quietly condoning ISIS, which troubles and upset people, and that's not right.
What do you think, Raza, about the Prime Minister's remarks this week?
I think it's deeply divisive, and as Zubeda said, it's the worst comments possible that he could make at this time. I mean, to be what we've seen about this issue regarding the women in Bradford, what's come out since the story, since the story was broken on Tuesday, is that these women, like other people that have gone abroad to fight as part of this extremist group, is that all it does is it helps aid division. All it does is create more tensions, and what it does is the cheek of it is David Cameron says game, and essentially what he's done is he's blaming the Muslim community and saying that it's on you to deal with this problem. And it's true. How do you expect then Muslims to be able to turn around and say, we should work with the government in dealing with these issues that affect us all? They won't. What he's done is he's caused more problems, and really I think it's political posturing, kind of aimed at more of his kind of right-wing zealot nutcases in his cabinet. And it's the Muslim community. All it will do is confirm for many people, especially young Muslims, that the government is not actually interested in dealing with this issue. They're interested in talking at us, or as Zubeda said, lecturing us.
Interestingly, obviously you mentioned there this Bradford family. Now it's an interesting case on many kind of folds, because these are 3 women, married women. So, all of this talk about jihadi brides and all of that, it doesn't feed into anything like that. So what on earth could have caused 3 women with their children, getting them out of school to then cross the border over into Syria? What would they do in Syria?
I think again, in terms of why they've gone to Syria, we haven't fully identified if they're completely in Syria. So I start off with that caution, first of all. But if indeed they are in Syria, it's deeply worrying because, again, it's women, younger women, who are taking their families and their younger children from 3 years old to 15 years old over to Syria into what they believe is probably fulfilling a duty in terms of living in an Islamic state. So some of the reasons around gender as to why, some of the younger girls have been going in light of the 3 girls from East London who have gone. When we talk about gender, it's quite often in terms of their age, marrying jihadis. They feel that they are part of a khilaf, an Islamic state, and so they are fulfilling an Islamic duty. And then once they're there, the very limiting role that they would have it would be, again, marrying and then goading other people in terms of joining the Islamic State. So I think the interesting development on this will be the fact that these are married women who will have very limited role further, and that they will not be able to return back if indeed they are in Syria. And I think this comes back to if we're going to work together on addressing radicalisation with communities, government has got to work with communities, and that means, again, in terms of the Home Office, in terms of people like David Cameron coming into communities and listening to why people talk about identity-led issues around belonging, because radicalisation doesn't just start in one day. It's a process that starts, and if people don't feel part of having that kind of Britishness in terms of identity, then we've got to look at those issues. And it's not just a British problem, it's a European problem. We've got in the UK around 700 people who've gone to fight for groups like IS, for example, and 10% of that is women who go to make this journey. And a conference I attended in America, there was an academic called Peter Neumann who mentioned the fact that in terms of the European problem, what we're not addressing, what governments aren't addressing, is identity.
It was really interesting, isn't it? Because you mentioned there, words of identity, of, it's not our problem, it's everybody's problem. But how on earth do we deal with a problem like this? Raza, what are your thoughts on this? How should this problem be dealt with?
Well, the thing is, if you want to deal with it, the worst example of how to deal with it is David Cameron's speech, which says, Muslims, you need to sort yourselves out. What you really need is a much more of an inclusive approach, and also the government needs to do less talking at Muslims and actually talking with Muslims. It's regarding these sisters, these ladies from Bradford that went, what's come out, and it was in the Newsnight piece on Tuesday about this, that many, there's a Bradford social worker said that many Muslim women had come to him saying that they were worried that their children would be taken away from them because of the counter-terrorism and security bill that was introduced under the last coalition government. And also today we've seen a letter that's been given to Keith Waz from the families and solicitors saying that the women were, they had enough of the oppressive nature, and I quote this, oppressive nature of the police surveillance. Now, the thing is, these are difficult things to discuss, but we have to be honest. If you really stop radicalization, if you want to stop people, leaving this country and not feeling part of Britain, rather than shouting out, have British values, believe in our values, what you need is to say, what are all the factors that have made these people want to leave this country, at the topics that are uncomfortable, the topics that point the finger back at our government, at the way that we've acted in the past.
Sure, but Raza, will Muslim people ever feel part of Britain? Will these people ever be engaged?
Well, see, I think it's part of the problem, though, is that it's putting the question to the Muslims, saying, are we doing enough to feel part of this country? Now, I think that Muslims can and should be a part of this country. But the reality is, if you look at the way Muslims are portrayed in mainstream media outlets, if you look at the way some government ministers talk about them, and now David Cameron's speech, Muslims will be asking, the same question, will we ever be part of this society? Because they're being demonized, they're being attacked. I mean, just one example.
But come on, how seriously do you think people will take some of these speeches? I mean, you've got MPs who are constantly making remarks. You've got people in all different walks of life making remarks about Muslims. And I think by now Muslims are a bit fed up of it. But how seriously are they taking these remarks?
Very so. And the thing is this, all you've got to do is look on social media to see what many Muslims have said. I mean, just yesterday, it was trending UK Muslims, and you could see pretty much all the Muslims on social media saying, oh my God, I cannot believe the cheek of what David Cameron is saying, and then he expects me to think I'm equal in this society. And just going back to my point earlier about how Muslims feel alienated in this country, when Ken Livingstone was the mayor of London, he commissioned a report to look at how Muslims are portrayed in the mainstream media, specifically newspapers. And what came out was that for every one positive Muslim story, 21 were negative. Now that doesn't go unnoticed. People do see that, and they do see that, hang on, we're treated in a manner that no other community, ethnicity, special interest group.
Raza, Zubeda wants to respond to some of those points. Zubeda.
I think Raza makes some valid points in that, but I also kind of believe it's important to emphasise that we don't buy into the politics of fear and kind of division within that. Not all Muslim communities feel the same in the sense of we don't feel detached, we're part of society, but we also feel strongly that our government needs to engage. And one of the things that we do with Connect Justice, for example, is about working with all types of community. We've just recently completed a crowdfunder where we're going to produce short 3-minute online films looking at the stories of former violent extremists, both on far right as well as former Islamist extremists. So I think we've got to take the innovation aspects of it.
Zubeda, that is a great thing that you're making those videos, but the harsh reality is you can put in the work, and look, you've had to go out to people, get some money, people say we're going to support this initiative. But what will happen is tomorrow you'll have another speech by another minister or the Prime Minister, and all it'll do is undo all that work, because all it says is...
Well, they won't undo the work. Raza, how can one speech undo the work?
I think you have to be confident. Let me finish.
I think the power. Hang on. Zubeda is an individual within the Muslim community, and that's good. She'll have an impact. But you're saying the Prime Minister of the country is saying that radicalization, the blame lies at the Muslim community's feet. That you can't. One speech may not undo it, but it's a speech by one of the most powerful men on earth and in this country. So it does have a massive impact.
One of the reasons that we exist primarily is about engaging with both police, communities and agencies, so that we're working together collectively, so that I'm not then a sole individual person lobbying on what I think is right or wrong. I think we've all got a role to play, not just Muslim communities, and that's an important part that Cameron and other ministers need to listen and reflect on. Whether it's happening or not, we have to collectively engage. That's part of democracy, is part of that.
You have a very diplomatic nature, and I appreciate that. But when you say it's not important whether it's happening or not, actually that's very important, because if Muslims feel they're not being listened to, well then it's actually very important if they think the government won't listen to what they have to say regarding these issues.
Sure, Raza, you've made some really, really interesting points, but how can Muslim communities be listened to if there's nobody in sort of senior positions, if there's, those people aren't making the difference? How can we make it happen? How can we make this happen, Raza?
Numerous ways. Undoubtedly, there are some Muslim groups and Muslim institutions like our mosques, etc., who have spectacularly failed in actually talking to the government. Tell
me some positives, Raza. Yes, they failed. Tell me some positives.
Well, the thing is, it's hard for me to see positives, because if you look at the way the government's tried to deal with violent extremism, if you look at, let's say, the inception of the Prevent strategy, happened 15 years ago now under Tony Blair's government, and what we've seen since then is more people becoming much more alienated, more people going abroad, more terrorism. So for me, I don't see things getting better. I see things getting worse. And my concern is the government is doing the exact same thing over and over again.
So are you saying change the government? Raza, are you saying change the government?
It's not about changing the government, it's about changing attitudes in the government, and that is looking at the issues that are hard to talk about, and that is stuff like foreign policy, about Islamophobia, and about our draconian laws, and they are draconian, and how they impact Muslim people's perceptions of how they're seen in this country.
Zubeda.
So I'm not still quite clear. I agree we need to talk about identity, about foreign policy, but what's a practical solution, Raza?
Sorry, I've given part of the solution. It's very clear, which is changing the attitude in which the government talks about these issues. So you're saying talk about foreign policy.
What about having
the government doesn't say that. The government doesn't say. The government actually says, Boris Johnson actually has said that any person that talks about foreign policy is being an apologist for terror.
Well,
that is ridiculous.
Raza, what's really interesting is, do you think maybe having a cup of tea with David Cameron over these issues, do you think that could possibly work?
That's if he was to open his door to other Muslim organizations. Right now, I feel the government only talks to people, and Muslim groups especially, that echo what they say, and that is, it's to do with ideology. And that has been rubbished academically, and it's been proven over the last 15 years that just doesn't work.
So are you of the mindset that nothing seems to work? Is there anything that could possibly work to make the Muslim community engaged in this? Because we've talked about foreign policy. We know what goes on around the world. We know the injustices that are out there. Changing people's attitudes and ideologies, that's long term.
No, but see, that's the thing, though. If it's long term, then let's start discussing it now in this government. And that means, when you say we know foreign policy is an issue, that is not what comes out of the speeches that David Cameron gives in other countries and lectures us. See, that's part of the problem. It's that if young Muslims, and remember, it is pretty much only young Muslims. This family of women is the exception to the rule, but generally it's young Muslims going over to join ISIS. For them, you'll see that they don't feel part of this country, and they feel David Cameron and other government ministers don't listen. Now, to change that perception, they have to be able to say, look, our foreign policy has had a role to play. Now, how do we deal with this problem? And need to have an honest consultation, not just listen to people what you want to hear. And what I'm saying is brutal. It's not nice to hear. But the thing is, I want to stop terrorism. I want to stop extremism. But that's the thing. If the government has the same mindset, then they need to change their rhetoric, like we saw in David Cameron's speech, and actually say, come on, guys, how do we deal with this problem? And let's talk about all the issues, even those that blame what I've done.
Really, really. I think actually there's something in that. What do you think, Zubeda?
I think being constructive, I'll kind of point out three things that kind of, if David Cameron was to sit here today, what could we do? So I think the first suggestion would be around kind of building kind of safe spaces for communities to engage with, whether it's policymakers, with police, but again, in terms of both the short term and the long term. So people have that space to articulate. The second thing is around the kind of online aspect. ISIS have been very good in terms of having a very coherent online message. It's attractive, it's adventurous, and we haven't got a narrative that kind of goes against the grain of what ISIS stand for, which is a very sectarian, murderous ideology. And again, what is a British response online in terms of working with communities, with families and with women? And the third aspect in terms of a practical solution would be around an intervention for those who are returning from areas of conflict. What do we do besides locking people up? We have some of the toughest legislation in Western Europe. We've had the recently introduced Counter-Terrorism Security Act 2015. All these measures by themselves will not work unless we all work together, communities.
We've just got a text in here from Jay. It says, Arsha, those people had a choice when they left this country. They could have chosen any country in the world. So why are they there if not for a sinister reason?
No, that's very clear. That's very easy to answer. Remember, the people that have gone over, let's look at what the people themselves have said. So the letter that went to Keith Vaz from the ladies, what they said is part of the issue was that they felt that the oppressive surveillance by the police made them felt alienated. Now, so when you say, why do people go over? The thing is, they don't feel part of this country. So then you can ask, but then why go to ISIS? Why not go to the Barbados, for example? Why do they have to be ISIS? Well, the reason is because they feel ISIS, and I know this is unbelievable that they think this, but they feel that ISIS are good. They feel that because they're taking on Britain and they feel that Britain doesn't treat them equally, they'll say, I'll join them. They'll say, because there's a place that I feel safe. But no, Zubeda mentioned about for women, the role may be restricted to being just housewives. The thing is, they won't feel that the niqabs will be pulled off in this country. They won't feel they'll be victims of Islamophobic attacks.
Raza,
that is part of it.
Raza, do you think there'll be a lot more sort of British Muslims and indeed women as well that will be going over to Syria?
Oh, brutal answer? Oh, God, yes. There will be loads of people going over. And the only way to stop this is to have an honest discussion. And that is not taking place within the corridors of power in our country right now.
Zubeda, what do you think about that? Do you think that actually we'll be seeing a lot more British people actually going over to Syria?
Yeah, there's been a year-on-year increase. So each year, that number, last year we were cited by the security agencies around 600. This year it's already gone up to 700. And again, I stress the fact that this is not something that's unique to the UK. It's happening across Europe. And indeed, there's more foreign fighters coming from the Arab countries than they are from Western countries as well. So basically, ISIS have got something powerful within which they get across international state boundaries and are appealing to everyone to come and join their murderous flight.
Sure. Zubeda and Raza, thank you very much for starting up this discussion. It's clearly something that won't be fixed overnight, but indeed we've got it on the airways tonight. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. There we go. Raza, Nadeem and Zubeda Limbada. If you too want to have your say, this is your show. You can drop me a text WM space, and then your text message to 81333, or indeed you can pick up the phone and give me a call as well. 03453 009956.
Your travel news in the West Midlands.
BBC WM 95.6.